Hello again. This is Atlas, hard as stone. Is it any surprise that his story begins with an asteroid? Temple Telemann had cast a spell on the indentured masses with a song that heralded the coming of a great stone destroyer, a god who would shatter the world and lead them to a great rebirth. The Orokin mocked the cult's off-key singing, their spasmodic dancing, but the spell only grew stronger. Telemann broadcasts would oft-times wedge into control channels to spread their doomsday message. For the suffocated lower castes, the notion of something more powerful than their Orokin masters must have been intoxicating. A brutal Orokin crackdown seemed to be working, until an asteroid was detected on a collision course with Earth. The Telemons celebrated it as prophecy writ true, divine intervention. For the first time in living memory, the Orokin showed vulnerability. It did not matter that the destruction would be total. For the Temple, this was a sign of a new age. A probe was sent to the asteroid, perhaps seeking proof of divine intervention. It found intervention, though it was anything but divine. The rock had been fitted with colossal steering thrusters, and manning those thrusters, a bevy of well-armed Telemann. Having taken fate into their own hands, they set about a final convulsive dance aboard that rock. Battle cruisers, Orgon missiles, a gale force of Dax. The Orokin could have resolved this in any number of ways, but their enemy was not the Telemans themselves. It was their ideas. Atlas alone was sent. As he crashed onto that rock, his Shakiro helm greeted the cultists. Note the angled ballistic plating and reinforced neck protection. He would soon need both. For years, historians felt this tale of Telamon quite improbable, an artifact of Orokin propaganda myth. Then, on our system's outer edge, we found a debris field of small rocks and dust in a lazy elliptical orbit. Upon these rocks, we find the remains of peculiar stone statuary. The petrified figures, clearly temple members, have been frozen into a tableau of struggle and death. Or was it perhaps a dance? This remarkable find forces us to rethink the entire tale as fact. The stratum Cyandana, reserved and austere, until you turn it over and reveal the glowing hue of the amethyst crystal within. A breathtaking geode. Imagine its spiraling ribbons as Atlas tore toward the killer asteroid's thrusters. His plan must have been to reorient them and push the rock away from Earth. But, as the story goes, as he neared, the cultists detonated the thruster's footings and sent them careening into space. They were no longer needed. Mass and inertia would carry the rock to its fate. Atlas was out of options, or so the Telemans thought. The Techo are perhaps my favorite pieces in this gallery. Note the intricate, ornate moldings, the complex blades. Quite the contrast from Atlas's otherwise workmanlike appearance. The beauty and craftsmanship conceal the true purpose of the Techo, as indentations found in cultist skulls attest. I have to wonder what frenzied dance would have been interrupted, or if the whiplash strikes and jabs of the Techo might have blended into the crowd's fitful celebration. Before you, a rare sight, two rumblers, painstakingly recreated from fragments of the aforementioned tableau. How these inert and rigid formations are compelled to life by Atlas defies reason. Yet it is true. Consider the confusion of those Telemans as the very stone they worshipped came to life and set upon them. How could they retaliate against such a thing? Like sparring with a landslide. swelled on the horizon as the cult mocked Atlas with their chorus, "The stone shall shatter all." Across the system, every Telemann echoed that final hymn. Children as far as Neptune turned their heads from greasy broth and gazed toward Earth. Would that careening stone change everything? Atlas kneeled down, head and hands pressed to the ground in apparent defeat as the Telemann's hymn grew even louder. But Atlas was listening, feeling the way the stone trembled to the hymn's pitch. The faults within the asteroid became vivid to him, and so a new song rose up. Rumblers, erupting in a godlike rhythm, beating along the faults until Atlas, alone, struck the final resonant chord. A tremor forked through the rock until, all at once, the great asteroid exploded, its dust falling as scintillating rain, sparking across the atmosphere, and then gone. The Telemann's song fell silent, and children as far as Neptune turned away and swirled their spoons in greasy broth. Greetings! What piques your interest this fine day? Grendel, primal, insatiable, and, as this exhibit will demonstrate, a creature of surprising compassion. After the fall of the Orokin Empire, a surviving Orokin executor, a violet-scented brute named Karish, lorded over Europa's frozen, famine-struck city of Ridda. Save within his walled manse, the moist and loathsome Karish lived a lavish life, while his frail citizens obeyed every edict in the hope of receiving his pre-masticated table scraps. As the city starved beneath him, Karish commanded yet another feast for himself and his gluttonous sycophants. 12 courses for each of his 12 grafted digestive sacs, and one uninvited guest. There remains a shallow trench through the ruins, as if some colossal boulder had crashed from the manse and rolled down the hill. But what if it had rolled up? Imagine, if you will, Karish's Dax on the day, peering out, dumbstruck by what they saw. They readied no blade, sounded no alarm, as the expanding orb of gristle hurled toward them. And then, in a spasm of giblets, Grendel was before them, his cutlery in hand, the masseter. Scraps of cloth matching Grendel's unexpectedly elegant Sayandana were retrieved from the site, hooked on the remnants of gilded gates, stained with evidence of his degustation. Indeed, most of the Orokin hangers-on who attended the feast became it. And Karish himself fled shrieking into the hills of Ridda as fast as his 12 exosac levitators would carry him. It came as no surprise to me to find this tiny fragment of Gauss just outside the city. Indeed, if one thing is for certain, wherever we find evidence of Grendel, we're sure to find some trace of Gauss as well. Did they breach the city as a pair? Or did Gauss hang back to intercept returning patrols, generously letting his friend Grendel eat his fill at the feast within? Note the open face, almost more like design, a fitting visage for one of such singular, rapacious predilections. Grendel may hunger, yes, but not with the excesses of gluttony, not when others are in need. Oral history tells of Grendel, newly engorged from his repast, rolling through the miserable slums of Ridda, reinvigorating the sick and the lame, the hungry and the dying, with the power he had stolen, consumed, from their oppressors. Here we have shattered fragments of the manse wall and the gate mangled by Grendel's masseter blade. One can almost see the city's masses, newly rejuvenated by Grendel's healthful blessing, storming the manse. Shattered gates thrown wide, they take back what was theirs, namely, control of their future. See here the scattering of genuine Orokin dinnerware. Worn with time, these must have been used for countless meals as the people of Ridda bravely weathered the dark times ahead. Many warframes have speed and litheness, but power, momentum, impact, these require mass. And there, the creased midsection, the seam, does it split? Yawning open with a jagged, vacuous aperture to who knows? A certain Orokin may have found out. That night, the people of Ridda ate their fill, feasting until the frozen mountains lit warmly with the dawn. It was toward those roseate peaks that the Executor had fled, pursued by Grendel. What his fate was, I cannot say. But as the people feasted, so the story goes, they were suddenly struck silent by a strange, deep sound. A rumble carried from mountain to mountain. A single, satisfied belch. Hello, hello. Exhibition is that way. Donation box just over there. Ivara, the Huntress. This tale comes to us from the secret history of the Orokin court by the historian Porvis. Have you perhaps heard tell of the Myrmidon? No matter. A preternatural beast figure straight out of myth he was, one whose prey had no equal. Warframes were what this villain hunted. It is said a number of frames had been erased from history by this monster. Models who no longer exist on any record. Those who are not remembered. It hardly seemed possible that a single person could stand against a warframe, let alone destroy it, let alone several. Perhaps Porvis enjoyed the telling a little too much, or perhaps there is something to it. Ivara encountered the Myrmidon quite early in her history. Quite early indeed. A Dax emergency call, so Porvis writes, led Ivara and two unknown warframes to a convoluted cave system. They found it littered with the bodies of murdered Dax and resplendent with bioluminescent fungi. I imagine the chitinous folds of her Salic Cyandana would have made for excellent camouflage within that malevolent, supernal glow. The secret history tells us that the Myrmidon appeared boldly before the three in a wide chamber connected by many tunnels. Clad in red and gold armor, it gestured to the first warframe with what Porvis describes as a strange clutching motion, as if seizing a falling apple. But it was no greeting, as we shall see. The powers of that first warframe, the recipient of that gesture, promptly failed. The Myrmidon took advantage of the confusion to leap upon the hapless frame and press a palm to the warrior's head. In lurid detail, Porvis describes a flash of the most scintillating emerald light, and Ivara's battle sibling collapsed to hot dust. Porvis tells us he compiled much of this tale from overheard exchanges between members of the Seven and details that remain consistent in courtly whispers. He tells us the second frame suffered the same fate as the first. Reacting, Ivara whirled and promptly vanished. But one clutching gesture in her direction and Ivara's powers fled, her cloaking field nullified. Visible, vulnerable, she loosed a dash wire arrow to a high alcove, but it never came. No escape. The Myrmidon was upon her. The huntress spun, opening fire with axamati pistols to send that devil scrambling for cover, arm thrown protectively across that twisted, armored head. That clutching gesture was the key. Ivara needed a plan, and she needed it fast. Ivara ran at a wall and up it, hanging there, waiting, as the Myrmidon flipped into the room, blasting the spot where he'd expected her to be. Frustrated, he again made that same elaborate gesture, trying his luck, and she saw it. That bracelet upon the wrist that glowed softly with the movement of that clutching gesture. Ivara flipped from her perch, shouldering her exquisitely crafted rubico as she did so, and sighted the enemy. Through the Orokin sculpted scope, hunter and huntress met eye to eye, each loosing a desperate blast, a bullet from Ivara, a killing light from the Myrmidon. The green light lashed, touching a shoulder plate of Ivara's aviar armor, reducing it to dust. It saved her. Huntress won out, her shot claiming the Myrmidon's device in a shower of sparks. But the Myrmidon's weapon remained lethal, and with it, he lashed out at Ivara in an emerald fury. Ivara hit the ground and sprang into a surrounding tunnel, the Myrmidon's shot lancing a gouge in the porous chamber wall. Ivara pressed her back to a shadowed outcrop at tunnel's end, while the Myrmidon's weapon blazed and cut and chewed through her only cover. As good a time as any to discuss the weapon before you. The Artemis bow, the huntress's signature weapon, and the tool with which she has wrought so much good. Said by some to be spirit bonded to her, others say the product of forgotten Orokin technology. What Plovis tells us next displays to good effect what warrior and weapon were capable of. Pinned behind eroding cover, seconds from death, Ivara summoned her Artemis bow, and it came to her. She and weapon as one. Without rising, she pulled back, aimed high, she and arrow as one, and loosed. Under Ivara's guidance, the arrow turned its path and shot down the corridor toward the Myrmidon, and lengthwise through his weapon. Around Ivara, the walls flashed green for a microsecond as the Myrmidon's weapon erupted. And then, silence. What is a bow without arrows? And these arrows? The Origin system has never seen their like, able to change their very nature at the whim of Ivara. Sleep, cloaking, rapid fire, they are the embodiment of her legendary versatility. Ivara drew her bow again, this time for her fallen comrades. With inhuman speed, shot after shot snapped and plucked each segment of carapace from the Myrmidon's lean frame. Straps severing, clips popping, he was undressed with swift efficiency by the preternatural accuracy of her aim and rapidity. Even before her final arrow belted the visored helmet from his head, she had the killing shot knocked and ready. There he stood, the Myrmidon, slayer of Warframes. Naked, beauty, symmetry, even the capacity for language, sacrificed for raw power. But his face was a mockery of an Orokin face, those she was sworn to never kill. The smirk on his pallid, angular visage told her he knew it as well. The grand doors of the Chamber of the Seven flew open. Across that reverberating expanse of polished darkness strode Ivara, dragging her prize. Before the assembled council, she dropped him, and with it the Myrmidon's battered helmet. Here he would meet justice at the hands of his own people. Here her fallen friends would be avenged. She beheld the seven, awaiting their judgment. The Myrmidon got to his feet, cleaning dust from one shoulder with a contemptuous flick. One of the seven leaned forward, removing a curious thing from their slender head, a lattice of delicate silver, placing it on the elevated, chest-high curve of obsidian that separated her from them. Instantly, the Myrmidon collapsed, lifeless, to the floor. Ivara did not understand. Why? Why? A stately voice intoned her name. There stood Executor Ballas. He told her, "You have been battle and loyalty tested. Your companions, they were found wanting. They failed to adapt, failed to overcome, and so they are no more. But you, Ivara, you shall live. You shall be remembered." Her battle comrades, as we know, were not. A friend of history is a friend of the Leverian. Gauss. Where to begin? Where to begin? Well, the Ceres excavation, of course. The site of the ancient Tower of Ultra. Blastcrete emplacements, air sentries, its fields saturated with tremor mines, a great fortress for the great lords of Ceres. Until they were pitched from the roof. Immortal bodies erupting on the dread mines below. An insurgency from within. The Dax, sent to reclaim Ultra, fared no better. Those that ran the gauntlet of bore guns were soon cindered in the field beyond. And that's when they called in our fleet-footed friend here. Dual sidearms pulled from Ultra's outer ring of Blastcrete bunkers. Something crashed through those bunkers at great speed. The impact scattering stone and flesh all the same. An unearthly kinetic shockwave. Those insurgents with the misfortune of surviving the initial blast must have seen the Icarius for themselves. The Axeltra, a rapid-fire micro-missile launcher. The smooth polycarbonate barrels still carry a vague stench of ozone. Some think Gauss was a blunt instrument, all speed, with as much versatility as a cannonball. But the Axeltra implies more. It implies surging in, inviting the enemy to consider the blade, then rebounding to let missiles answer their confusion. Not the standard dress helm. This one has specialized control surfaces, angled plating, supreme streamlining. It catches the light in a curious way, doesn't it? When it shines just so, I see myself atop Ultra, a hostage perhaps, peering out across the desolate field, and then I'd see it, a pale glint of light. Dax of the day had a saying, "That which cannot be hit cannot be killed." I can only imagine what they thought when they saw Gauss that day. A gleaming bullet, this Syandana pinned rigid like a flag in a maelstrom, streaking toward Ultra. A stripped-out Gauss airfoil system. These fanciful contrivances contribute the Kubradon share of this Warframe's acceleration. Strength, mass, density, all held in a delicate balance. Gauss, front edge, smooth, heat-resistant composites, trailing edges, streamlined, foiled. This particular one vaguely warped by extreme heat stress. the Saint of Ultra. If the mind wanders, what do you see? I see a vivid, lord-like festival. The tremor mines bursting in a blinding wave, rising toward Ultra, and Gauss, a smear of light, just ahead of the thermal avalanche, fast as fire. No, faster. The Leverian exists thanks largely to the donations of patrons such as yourself. Please leave a little something. Nova, mercurial, unpredictable, and a miraculous example of harnessed antimatter. It would be a bold fool indeed who tried to tame lightning. One such individual was Wholesome Yer, a freelance problem solver who commanded high fees for his low morals. A deficiency that netted him great success in endeavors where a conscience would have held others back. He is the only figure known to have secured a back-channel charter permitting him to selectively raid certain rails, so long as Orokin ships were avoided. The story of Nova and Yer survives via the captain and security logs of the Orokin vessel Mascus Theodolite. It survives because it was deemed to be of historical importance. Orokin investigators scrutinized every frame of security footage, each line of the captain's log, for assurance that the outcome of this encounter was indeed true. The passenger vessel Mascus Theodolite reported critical problems with her engines. Nova, mistress of antimatter, was deployed to relight the Theodolite's antimatter reactor before the vessel was drawn into the gravity well of a nearby planetoid. 10,800 passengers were at risk. Clipping this Hyandana to herself, she exited her lander. The interior of the ship was deathly quiet. But then, chaos. Behind her, the section of the ship securing her lander was detonated and blown free, stranding her for the time being. From deeper inside the ship, cries for help. Nova sped toward the shouts of trapped crewmen. 8 were locked in flow control behind a hardened glass wall. Opening a wormhole between herself and them, she phased the crewmen to safety as their compartment flooded with lethal gas. Booming from speakers in every hallway, Wholesome Yer declared himself. Wholesome Yer, the man who at one time had run the Pluto Resistance, who spent 3 years terrorizing the rails between Jupiter and Venus just to prove that he could, who took that notoriety and translated it into a career. Security, political assassination, courier runs, torture, graft, blackmail, and in one case, so it was said, genocide. There were graves already dug for him by the many who wanted him dead. Word was, Wholesome already had a tomb prepared for himself on some distant moon, with a table piled high with riches and a chair just waiting for him to be sat in for eternity. A man capable of anything, and a man who would rather die than lose. A man easily recognized by the signature item before you. It was, so they say, an item of great personal significance to the old rogue. Why, and what history it shared with him, is a matter of some speculation. Unaware she was being led into a trap built just for her, I don't imagine Nova took any special precautions. This Flux model helm, for example, was fairly standard. The appealing venting displayed her antimatter nature, an announcement of power as much as an evocation of beauty. Where were we? Oh, aye, yes. Nova and the rescued crew moved for the escape pods. Once they were clear, she would about face and find some way to free the remaining 10,792. Alas, thuds and clangs resounded as every life pod ejected into space, empty. Yer clarified, boomingly, that escape was not an option. To punctuate this assertion, bulkheads slammed down in every corridor ship-wide. The only path Yer left open, worryingly, was the one that led directly to the Theodolite's antimatter reactor, the very thing Nova had come to save. What was the old pirate playing at? Yer answered Nova's unspoken question. He had jettisoned the antimatter core. Without that, it was impossible for the reactor to function, and the Theodolite would smash into the planetoid in a matter of minutes. Yer had been paid, by persons unknown, to neutralize Nova completely. Yer, a man who prided himself upon an ignorance of the impossible, had agreed and devised this trap. Nova was a being created to contain and harness antimatter. The antimatter drive no longer had a fuel core. His proposition was simple. Nova would enter the reactor chamber, crack her own containment, and kickstart a new reaction using her own body as fuel. She could save 10,800 lives, but only at the cost of her own. She had minutes to decide. With a flick of her wrist, Nova's haiku throwing stars took out every camera in eyeshot, killing Yer's surveillance of them. This done, she turned to the technicians she had just saved. She would need their help. Nova walked to her doom. As she entered the reactor's chamber, Yer smugly assured her she was doing the right thing. Within the reactor's observation room, the technicians nodded assent. This was going to be close. From the bridge, Yer sealed the reactor chamber's blast doors. Seconds later, on Nova's signal, the technicians overrode that command. The doors shot upwards, and Nova wormholed out of the chamber and back into the corridor. Leaving that portal open, she created another, straight up into the vent system. On the bridge, Yer had little time to react, but react he did, ordering all prisoners to be killed. In that moment, a portal flashed into existence, Nova launching herself amidst pirate, captain and crew, and showed them what she was made of. In a blinding flash, Yer and every mercenary on that bridge was deeply infused with Nova's antimatter, starting a chain reaction within them. Yer realized what was happening, but too late. With a few precise shots from her Syra customized sniper rifle, Nova neutralized those mercenaries who were quicker off the mark before grabbing Yer by his brightly irradiated hair. Hurling him back through her network of wormholes, Nova sent wholesome Yer pinging from portal to portal before tumbling out into the reactor chamber. The wormholes collapsed. Yer struggled to his feet as every molecule in his body approached critical. Behind the glass, the technicians gave him a final, grim salute before slamming the blast door closed. Wholesome Yer, pirate and legend, went Nova. The reactor caught the reaction. The technicians harnessed it, and the engines of the Mascus Theodolite roared to life. It was, indeed, the boldest of fools who attempted to leash lightning. And so, a notorious rogue, said to be unkillable, met his end in the attempt, as the historical record now demonstrates.